In this video, we'll go over 4 different ways to share functions and values between your scripts and your lenses. They are using global variables, using the scripting API, using the shared script object, and using modules. Let's get started. So the first method we're going to look at is using global variables. So I'm going to open up this global script over here in my code editor, and I'm just going to define a global value. So I'll say global.answer equals 42. So in JavaScript, you have this global object, and you can put any function or value on it, and it will be shared across any script in that runtime. So I can come over to my main script, and instead of just displaying the score 0, I'm going to change this to show our global answer. Now, when I save that script, you might notice that it now says score is undefined. And that's because even though I have this global script in my project, I need to add it to the scene. So I'm just going to drag this up. Let's go ahead and rename it so we know what it is. And you might notice it still says undefined. And that's due to the execution order of these scripts. So if I select each script, you can see that it's triggered on awake. On awake runs before anything else in the lens happens. The lens hasn't technically started yet. It just kind of is initializing things. So what we could do is our main script that wants to use this global variable, we could change this to onStart. And so the global script will run first, initialize this variable, and then our main script can use it. Alternatively, we can change this back to onAwake, and we can just drag our global script somewhere before the main script runs, because everything will run in order. We start at the top and go down to the bottom. And with global variables and stuff, I like to put it up at the top just so it's easy for me to find later. So that is how we can use a global variable. You can also make functions global. That's one way to kind of use different values in different scripts. Next, let's look at the scripting API. So I have this other script here, scripts API. And I'm going to create a new function. Just call it getScore. And usually you'd probably do some calculation, but I'm just going to return a value. Now this function its scope is limited to just this script here. We can't use it elsewhere. But what we can do is every script in Lens Studio has this script object. And it has this property called API. And we can put functions and values on this API property. So I'm going to say script.api.getScore equals getScore. So this getScore is this function we wrote. And then this getScore is the property on the API property of this script object. So what we can now do is we can import the script somewhere else, and we'll be able to access this function. So let's look at what that looks like. I'm going to jump back to my main script. I'm going to add a new input. I'm going to do the // @input. I want to add a component.script component, and I'll just call this other script. And I'll save my script. If I come back to Lens Studio, I'll click off of that one, click back, and you can see we have this new input. And so if we click it, we can select a script, but it has to be a script that's in our scene. So let's go ahead and add our script API script here. Let's rename this to script API. Now, if we select main, we can choose our other script. And instead of doing global.answer, we're going to do script.otherScript. So to access these imports, we have to call this script object. And then this other script is what's on there. And then we'll say .api.getScore, and we'll put the parentheses here because we're calling the function. And so when we save, you're going to see another error. Now what's going on? It's that same thing with execution order. This script is trying to run and call a function that doesn't exist yet. So in this case, let's also move this up. And I have these shared functions. I also like to put things up at the top to help keep it all organized. So now you can see we have our script API. We're creating this function. We're making it available on this API property. And in our main script, we can import it and we can call that function. Now you might notice here we have to do script.api.getScore. Here when we call it, we just call the import, and then we can just directly call .api. We don't need to do script.other_script.script.api. It's just .api. Now technically we could leave this .api off, but the script object has some built-in properties and methods. And if you want to import something with the same name, you're going to get some interference. So make sure you always put these functions and values on this .api path. This is set up for that. Now let's take a look at using the shared script object. So we've used the script object. We took the script object, and on the API property, we added our function. So over here, we're going to do a very similar setup. So let's do function get real score. We're going to return 11. Now I'm going to export it here. And there we go. And now one thing really quick, just watch out for, make sure you don't call the function here. We want to export the function itself. So anyway, so we have this, and on our main script, we could use the import like this, but now we're going to come to our script component, and we're going to click on add script. So on our shared script, and one thing you might notice here is my main script, I've now set it to on start. If we have it to on awake, we have to worry about the order, and that gets messy having to delete and add scripts. So make sure you set your main script to on start, and then any script with these functions you're importing to on awake. So on awake, and then our main script on start. Now we're going to come into here, and we have our shared script here. We're just going to call this function. So we can just copy this. Let's go ahead and paste it, and let's add the parentheses to make it a function call. And now we got this score 11. So we are exporting our function on the API, on the script object, just the same as our second example. But now, since we added the script to the same script component, we don't need to use this input thing like this. So I'm not the biggest fan of this method because it's not explicitly clear where this is coming from. Since this is a small lens, it'd be pretty easy to figure out. But on the big lens, it might take a little more digging. But maybe you have some helper functions that get reused a lot. This might be a quick way to make those available to your other scripts. You just add them on the same script component, and anything exported here is going to be available on other scripts on this component. So this is a pretty handy method. Just make sure you're using it responsibly so you know and remember where these functions are coming from. All right, so our last method is using modules, and this is going to be very familiar if you're a JavaScript developer. So let's create our function. Add, we'll take 2 arguments, and let's just return a plus b. Now to use this elsewhere, we can add module.exports, and let's export that function. So we're exporting the function. Now over here on main, we're going to just import that. So let's destructure, so we want just the add function. And now this is important. Make sure you use the relative path. So it's called for module. And let's just restart that. All right, sometimes you'll get those little errors because my code editor autosaves. So if it's faster than I'm typing, you're going to get those errors. So just reset if you're unsure if things are working. All right, so we have our add function, and let's call add 1 and 2. And we'll save that, and you can see our lens resets, and we have score 3. Now, one thing that's different about this is all of our other methods, we had to add our script to the scene. But when we're using the module exports, you do not add it to the scene. If I wanted to try to add this, I'd actually get an error because module is not defined. So let's go ahead and delete this. So if you are going to do this module.exports, you don't add your script to the scene. You just leave it in the resources panel, and you just kind of import it using require. So there you go. You can use global variables or functions. You can use the scripting API. You can use the shared script object. or you can create modules and import them in your other scripts to access different functions and values anywhere you want in your project.